I'm a 27-year-old woman, and this happened to me 9 or 10 years ago when I was a senior in high school. We lived in a pretty large house, but my siblings were all away at college or boarding school, so it was only my parents and I in the house. I'm a crazy light sleeper, so when I woke up in the dark and saw my alarm clock flashing 3:11 a.m., I wasn't too surprised. However, I was wide awake, not just groggily stirring in my sleep. I lay there, wondering what had woken me, when I heard very soft footsteps on the stairs outside my bedroom. The door to my room was parallel to the left side of the bed, and I happened to be laying with my back to the door. When the footsteps approached my door, I thought it must be one of my parents checking on me for some reason. Then the doorknob was turned, so slowly. Still, I thought that they were just trying not to wake me. The door began to open again, slowly and carefully. It made a creaking noise, no matter how slowly it was opened, so the person finally just shoved it the rest of the way to silence the creak. Still, my naive brain thought it was one of my parents, until they clicked on the flashlight. I froze. Terror flooded me, and I remember I instantly broke out in sweat. They were behind me, and I was facing away, so they couldn't see my eyes wide open as they shone the beam straight on me. I always used to think that if something like that ever happened, I would be really hard and just whip out of bed and punch them, attack them, shout, scream, do something. But I could do nothing at all. All I could do was try to keep my breath deep and even, despite the pounding of my heart, so that the intruder wouldn't know I was awake. After about 10 seconds, they finally moved the light away. I prayed and begged and bartered with anything that would listen to me as the intruder walked around my room, looking at my things. I could vaguely see their shape, large and bulky, like they were wearing 2 coats. They had a baseball cap on. They didn't shine the flashlight on me again, and after a few minutes, which felt like an eternity, they left my room. I could still hear them, though, walking around the rest of the second floor through my siblings' empty bedrooms. I was still sweating, still frozen in terror, not knowing what to do. I wanted to grab my phone and call my dad, sleeping downstairs. I wanted to call our landline so that the phone would ring and wake my parents up. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to get up and run for my room. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't do any of those things. I was afraid that they would hear me, and I didn't know if they had a weapon and would try to hurt me or my parents. I wouldn't wish such helpless terror on my worst enemy. I don't know how, but I must have passed out from fear, or the adrenaline wore off, and I fell asleep somehow, because the next thing I knew it was 6 a.m., and I could hear my parents downstairs. I ran downstairs, and as calmly as I could, I asked them if one of them had been in my room last night. Their faces went blank, and they said no, they hadn't. That was the last straw. I broke down in sobs and told them, "Then someone was in my room last night?" Even as I typed this, my hands have begun shaking and I've teared up. The police were called, and even though there was little they could do at that point. Apparently when my parents woke up, all of the doors to the outside were standing wide open, and there was a duffel bag at the bottom of the stairs. All that was inside was a coil of nylon rope and an empty USB flash drive. I don't want to think about what it was for. The intruder hadn't taken anything, and we have no idea why they left in what appeared to be a hurry. It took me about a week to be able to sleep in my own room, a sanctuary which felt violated and frightening to me now. I carry pepper spray, sleep with a machete next to my bed, and double-check my locks every night. Hopefully this will never happen again, but if it does, hopefully I won't freeze in fear. It's been 10 years, and my most common nightmare is that someone is in my room, standing in the shadows, watching me. Take it back to 2007-2008. I was 16 when this began, 18 or 19 when it finally went to court. Picture a Norman Rockwell-esque suburban family. Parents, 3 kids, a yard and a dog. In blink and you'll miss it, USA. One random day, a neighbor man had a mild dispute with his neighbor. As a totally warranted response, Neighbor Man takes every hose he has and floods their yard. Solid decisions led to solid consequences, so naturally he was fined for water waste. My parents run the water in small-town USA, and because Neighbor Man lived a block from us, he decided to drive over to the water district, shouting that he is an acquaintance of my parent. Second solid decision of many to come from Neighbor Man. Absolutely no one takes kindly to name-dropper folks, so tuck that gem away under life facts. My parent comes in and tells him even if his kids did this, they would have the same repercussions, gracefully glossing over the fact that other than maybe driving by one another, none of us actually had ever interacted with Neighbor Man. Neighbor Man repeats the name of the man working the front desk as well as my parents' name and claims it's now personal, and storms out. My family members and I begin to see Neighbor Man at random places constantly, the DMV, the grocery store, our respective jobs. Apparently, when you're cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs and your parents pay for your house, you have all kinds of time to stalk. It went from random sightings while out and about to phone calls, the cliché 90s type of call, breathing, and hang-ups, and I can see you variety. At this point, Neighbor Man was more of an annoyance than scary. But as I have stated, when you underestimate crazy, you lose every time. Neighbor Man began parking across from our house, staying from 6 p.m. to 4 a.m., literally just sitting in his car, blasting music, staring at the house. Fool must have had the determination and bladder of a racehorse, because who in the world just sits there for 10-ish hours? His music was trash too. Maybe he was a masochist and into self-harm, seeing how long he could suffer through terrible music and a full bladder. I doubt anyone with a semi-rational concept of social interaction could fathom why. This went on from 3 to 4 times a week to a nightly occurrence. Imagine being a 16-year-old female that doesn't even feel comfortable to changing her room because of the prospect he might see through the blinds somehow, trying to sleep knowing he's out there. We were prisoners in our own home. He began to get bolder. Neighbor Man drove his car speeding up and down onto the sidewalk at my sibling and her partner while they were sitting on the sidewalk out front coming home from a date. They both had to physically jump out of the way to avoid being hit. He made lewd gestures at me when I brought my dog out for a walk and was waiting for my sibling to come out and join us on the walk. It was so bad I ended up crying and going inside. This had been going on for a year at this point. The cops always said the same thing. There's nothing we can do unless there is a threat made against you or someone is harmed. My parent confronted, meaning tired of this and asking him what he thinks he is doing, Neighbor Man in the street after my incident, to which Neighbor Man called the cops and they came asking us why we were harassing and threatening Neighbor Man. I will never understand why the system waits until you are a victim rather than prevents someone from being victimized. Almost 2 years in, and it's Christmas time. My parent had a brain aneurysm. Fortunately, they made it through without any lingering effects, which is extremely rare. I convinced my other parent, who had been living at the hospital with their sick partner, to come home and shower and eat. About 9 p.m., we get a knock at the door. A random man in ratty clothes holding a Christmas present says he is there to deliver to our family name. We asked who sent him, and he says he can't say. We ask who he works for, and he shoves the gifts at my parent and leaves. We are obviously uncomfortable to open it. Parent decides they need to know what it is and opens the present. Inside is a 17-page document of the grounds on why Neighbor Man is suing my parent that was currently in the hospital. Even I could tell it was fake with the grammatical errors and typos. Neighbor Man took the time to sit and type this up himself, thinking it would scare us. The document and fake details he put in did not. The fact that this 40-something-year-old man was so fixated on our family that he sat and typed a 17-page fake document did scare us. Things progress, and Neighbor Man began pacing in front of his car and pretending to have phone calls where he talked about pushing my parents down the stairs or knowing where we kids went to school and worked and how easy it would be to access us at any time. At the time, I worked a closing shift that let me off at about 1 a.m. He would be parked next to my car and follow me home. One time I even tried to take random roads and he still stayed right behind me, pulling up to the house with neighbor man parked across the street. Think the neighborhood street with maybe 5 feet between a car parked on one side and one on the other, and having to get out and run to the door was an absolute nightmare. We were all exhausted from not only the aneurysm scare, but also living and looking over our shoulders. My parents' friend told her friend, who was a district attorney, about the situation. She called and came over and took our case on pro bono. Testifying was a wild ride. We had to put in official statements prior to being called to the stand. We were not allowed to be in the room when a family member was testifying, nor were we allowed to talk in the halls as we waited for our turn. Imagine reliving 2+ years of traumatic experiences, being cross-examined where you are made out to be a liar, then not able to have your family comfort or support you afterwards was not ideal. There was enough to put him away for a 1.5 years, as well as grant a felony restraining order. We moved while he was still incarcerated. My sister passed while he was in prison, and he immediately tried to sue her estate. She was 21 at her death when he was released. He claimed that her testimony from him running his car at her and her partner was false and the only reason he was locked up. Not the case, as there were harassment and stalking charges, and that the money people donated to a GoFundMe for her accident, that he was entitled to that. There's so many more details, but this was already long enough. So neighbor man, let's never meet again. You made us prisoners in our home for years, clearly are still the same, and have not learned a thing from the time you're locked up. You are truly insane. So I want to start off by saying I still work for this company, and I still have anxiety every time I go into work. The company is huge and one of the biggest names in the world. For privacy reasons, I'm going to call it the Big Cheese or Big C. I also want to mention that I have crippling social anxiety. I credit it to being homeschooled most of my life, and this will also make sense later. Well, September of last year, I was fresh out of high school and looking for work. I needed this job immediately because I was living with my significant other and we were barely getting by. My father, my grandfather, they both either work or worked for this company for a long period of time, and it's something that garnered a lot of respect in my family. So of course I was thrilled when I got my first interview. It went great and I was all set to start training, which involved a few classes and on-the-job training. The classes were awkward to say the least, but nonetheless informative. Well, after the classes, we had our first task: join a group of fellow trainees and tour the work environment. This is when I first met creepy coworker. He was in the very back of my group, seemed a little shy and didn't really talk to the rest of the group unless he was trying to make an awkward joke to join in. At first, I kind of just felt bad for him. He seemed harmless, but definitely awkward and out of the loop. Knowing as much as I did going into the company, I made the effort to inform him and keep him updated with what the trainers were asking of us. He just seemed so lost and confused. I thought I was doing a good thing by helping him out. Even my significant other thought so at the time. The training went by without any hiccups, and soon we were given the location of where we'd start out. Ironically enough, the only person I had gotten to know, creepy coworker, had the same area I did. Realizing that we'd start out together and both didn't know anyone, we decided to exchange phone numbers. This was so that we could both meet up the next week, starting day, so we wouldn't get lost. I thought nothing of this when he asked for my number and just assumed it was more because he was nervous and didn't know anyone besides me. And boy, did I live to regret that. The first day of training, we met up at basically a flagpole so that we could wait for our on-the-job trainer, Christy. When he got off the employee shuttle, he started texting me asking where I was. I was in the smoking section a little ways away, killing my fears with a cigarette. I texted back telling him where I was, and he asked if he could join me. I didn't like how nervous I felt, so I wasn't very comfortable with anyone joining me during this time of reprieve, but I saw him coming over anyways, so I scooted over to make room on the bench. This didn't matter because apparently he was going to sit as close as possible to me anyways. I hate touch, or people being in my personal bubble. Being a victim of either trauma, touch was something only people very close to me had permission to do. Creepy coworker then proceeded to ask me if he could bum a cigarette, and I'm not good at saying no, so I gave him one. After he lit up, he handed me my lighter, that I didn't even notice that he took from the top of my bag, back to me. Again, I kind of just ignored the unwarranted invasion of my space. We talked since we had about 30 minutes to kill. We talked about the normal stuff like, how do you feel about the company? Where do you want to end up in it? I noticed he was wearing tattoo-covering sleeves, and so I asked him about his tattoos. He pulled down the sleeves and started going over almost each and every one. All something to do with either a love interest or something geeky. I listened out of mild curiosity, but quickly got uncomfortable when he started pulling out his phone to show me pictures of ones he drew. I was uncomfortable because he kept showing me pictures of himself as well. Mostly photos of him shirtless, and I didn't really find that appropriate. He mentioned that he was a Marine and that he had gained too much weight after his last tour. I apologized out of sympathy and suggested that it was nothing to be ashamed of. Unfortunately, after that, he kept smiling at me in a way that I deemed to be admiration. I had seen this look from my fiancée, so I knew somewhere I had effed up. I quickly turned the conversation to more appropriate stuff like music taste. He seemed interested in what music I liked a little too much and decided he should make me a playlist. I said it really wasn't necessary, but he insisted. Later into that very day during training, he kept purposely doing kind things like taking heavy boxes from my hands or taking the odd jobs he deemed too grueling for a lady. I was a little annoyed, but mostly just glad most of the jobs meant that he'd have to go to a different area and give me some space. He'd always find a way back to appear beside me and scare me. I hate being scared, and he laughed it off every time. I was more than uncomfortable at this point, and a nervousness had settled in the pit of my stomach. At the end of the night, after we'd been sent to go home and come back the next day, he decided to walk me out. We'd walk back through the maze my workplace actually is, all the way to the employee costume center and lockers. It was there we had gotten our work costumes and stored our regular clothes in lockers. Well, I was having trouble remembering the combination, and I couldn't find the little slip of paper that told me it. Creepy coworker came up and smirked at me, seemingly waiting for me to finish up. I thought he had left by this point, so I wasn't expecting him to show up. After a few tries, he reached over and put the combination of my lock in for me. This was a serious red flag for me. He had already memorized my combination, and now I felt as though my privacy was completely gone. Again, I'm awkward and unsure of what to do in any situation like this, so I thanked him but suggested that he let me figure it out next time. I was hoping he would so that he would forget my combination and remember this for later. After changing back into my regular clothes in the girls' locker room, I came out and he was still waiting for me. I asked him why he had waited when he could have just gotten home sooner, to which he replies, "Because I'm a gentleman, and a lady should be walked to her car so she can be kept safe." I told him my significant other was waiting to pick me up. He asked where, and I told him down the street, like an idiot. I still don't know why I complied with this creep as much as I did, but I had never been in a situation like this. He told me that was too far for me to walk and that it wasn't safe, so he offered to drive me over to my significant other's car. Due to how tired I was and how much I ached from the day, I just didn't have the strength to argue. I mean, he was creepy, but nice. I chalked up the creepiness to him just being awkward. So without anything else weird happening, he took me to my significant other, whom I had been texting the entire time just to let him know where I was and what was going on. I had a deep gut feeling that I should text him everything I knew about the guy, so I did. When we pulled up, I immediately got out of the car. My boyfriend sat there, leaning against the car with his arms crossed. He wasn't very happy about him giving me a ride, but nonetheless thanked the creepy coworker for getting me over to him safely. The coworker nodded, seeming to smirk at my boyfriend the whole time. This is when my boyfriend first got a bad feeling about the guy. So we got home and my boyfriend warned me about the guy, telling me he wasn't getting a good vibe from the creepy coworker. It was not even 3 minutes after that, I got a text from the coworker. He started sending me songs and memes, telling me things like, "I really feel like you get me." Now, I was deeply concerned. What did I get myself into? Why did I have to be so nice to people? The following day at work, I was on the last day of training and I had a massive panic attack. I have a chronic illness, and the situation ended with none of my managers listening to me when I told them that the pain doesn't last and comes and goes. They proceeded to rush me to the emergency room. A stretcher carried me through work while I was trying to hide my face. The customers were quick to take out their phones and film the whole thing. It was one of the worst experiences of my life, but what happens next is worse. I received about 20 texts from a creepy coworker asking me how I was. At this point, I was done. I just didn't respond. After a few random memes, he started texting me that he was drunk and thinking about not going home to his wife. This was the first time he'd ever mentioned to me he even had a wife. I was dumbfounded. Why was he so concerned about me when he had someone he obviously loved enough to marry? I didn't respond. I went to bed. In the morning, I woke up to my boyfriend looking at my phone in anger. My heart sank, and I could only imagine what creepy coworker had sent now. My boyfriend showed me the only text I had gotten since the night before. It was from my wife texting me from his phone. She wrote me a message explaining that creepy coworker had a problem getting attached to women. She warned me that I should stay away from him and then told me her name. My name. It was after that she had explained my name was a thing for him. All of his exes had the same name. Now at this point, my boyfriend was telling me not to go back to this job, that it wasn't worth it. But that's not me. I wasn't going to let one creep ruin this opportunity for me. This job meant the world to me, and I never wanted to let it go. So I told him if this continues that I'd go to HR. But in all honesty, I didn't really want to go to HR. I was the new girl. I didn't want the first month on the job to be me fighting a harassment case. Biting my nails the whole way, I went to work. Suddenly, creepy coworker wasn't hovering anymore. I thought this might have been him being embarrassed. I was pretty convinced I wasn't going to have a problem after that. Big mistake. On my lunch break, he made sure to go on his lunch early and come find me. His normally enthusiastic attitude was gone, replaced by what felt like anger. I was scared. He came up to me and let me know that his wife was full of it and just angry because he was divorcing her. At this point, I didn't want anything to do with him, so I just kept quiet, hoping that he'd take the hint. Nope. He told me he had a gift for me and that he'd give it to me after the shift, quickly walking away before I could respond. After my shift, I go outside the work area to the lockers. I had waited an extra hour and a half, even taking a closing position from a coworker, just so he'd go home before me. Well, my lock wasn't locked all the way, and I was now freaked out. I opened the locker and grabbed my bag and go, but noticed it. A rolled-up piece of drawing paper. I know what kind it was because I myself am an artist. Unrolling it, it was a naked girl. A naked girl that resembled my video game character on World of Warcraft. I had briefly mentioned my WoW addiction to my group on the first group training day. I didn't even realize he had heard any of that, much less memorized the information. Suddenly he walks up, even though he should be long gone by then, and confronts me. He asked me if I like it, and because he seemed angry, I said yes. I suggested he didn't do it anymore, as my boyfriend wouldn't like this kind of gift at all. He rolled his eyes and playfully giggled at me like I was joking with him. I wasn't. Not only did he follow me the whole way out of the work grounds, he got in the employee shuttle that I got onto to have witnesses. He sat right next to me, leaning on me. I felt like a deer in headlights, mentally begging someone to suggest that he shouldn't be that close to me. No one paid any attention. Instead, I spent the whole drive trying to get this man to pull his arm off of my shoulders. I felt nauseated and my head was spinning. After we got off, I practically dashed off the bus and ran to my boyfriend, who parked the car at the entrance to the employee parking zone. I got in the car and told him to go. He took off, and I started crying. I told my boyfriend, and he was livid. He wanted to turn around and punch creepy coworker, but I talked him out of it through my tears. I promised that I'd talk to my managers after that. Well, I kept looking for the right time to pull the manager aside, but never got a chance the next night I went in. Now creepy coworker's attitude did another 180, and he was being extremely, weirdly playful. Then he crossed the final line. He grabbed my butt where customers could easily see him. My coworkers kind of laughed and thought it was some sort of game. Because this time, I was angry and pushed to my limits. I went after him. I legitimately punched him in the butt and shouted in his face, "How do you like that, huh?" Seething, he seemed unfazed by my anger. Instead, he laughed it off and winked at me. I went down into the basement for the employee bathroom and quickly threw up the contents of my stomach. I cried in the stall, praying to God that this would stop. I quickly made an excuse, used my chronic illness, and went home. So fast forward a few weeks, he had completely swapped out his shifts so he wouldn't work with me. I felt like I had won the battle. I sent a message and he realized he'd crossed boundaries. Until the night before Christmas Eve. I had a terrible feeling as my boyfriend was driving me to work that night. I felt gross. I got to work and there he was, flirting with other girls, suddenly having this big ego I had never seen him display before. Like I said, when I met him, he was shy and awkward. It's like his personality flipped every time I had to see him. I never knew which side of CC that I was going to get. That night, he actually stomped off as all of the other coworkers, including myself, closed the joint. We were scrubbing like normal and he didn't seem altogether, so he clocked out early and I relaxed. I figured that he had gotten into trouble since one of our 4 managers seemed to be upset that he'd clocked out without permission. I was there extra late. The evening festivities were done with for the night and my zone was pretty much closed off from customers. So I walked through the massive property that is my work to get to the street. I had started taking new ways to meet my boyfriend who picked me up, just so I couldn't be followed. This time I was going to walk straight out of the grounds and onto the street where the bus stops were and my boyfriend would be waiting at the curb. I was about halfway through my approximately 12-minute walk, and I was in a dark area. Out of nowhere, as I'm sure you've already guessed, creepy coworker shows up. He starts yelling my name and following me from behind. I pretend to not notice and walk faster. He yells my name again and seems angrier, so I sprint for it. I sprint all the way across the shuttle zone and end up crashing into someone's chest. And thank God it was actually my boyfriend who had a really bad feeling and wanted to be as close to my work exit as possible. I looked back and creepy coworker got on the shuttle but was staring from the window, smiling like a Cheshire cat the whole time. Never in my life had I been so terrified. After that, the next night was Christmas Eve and I was supposed to work, but I just knew if I went in, something bad was going to happen to me. So, crying the whole time because I knew I had earned a bunch of points for calling out to avoid him. I cried asking the lady on the phone if I was going to get fired and she said she honestly couldn't say. I respected that, but knew I wasn't done. I wasn't going to let this effing creep make me lose my job that I had worked so hard to get, even changing my appearance to fit their strict standards. No. So I wrote to the only person I could think of, my trainer Christy. She was a lead and she was the kindest girl you'd ever met. Heart of gold, you just knew being her friend meant that you'd have a trusted confidant for life. I told her everything. I sent her the screenshots of the text sent to me. I finally told someone with an ounce of leadership that I was scared to go to work. Immediately she responded and asked if she could tell the managers, and even though I was incredibly nervous, I told her yes. The next day I was pulled in, and God bless my ex-manager Christopher, because he was shocked at everything that had happened to me and quickly helped me write a report for HR. He led me through the steps and even changed the schedule so I wouldn't work with creepy coworker unless he specifically traded shifts. 2 months go by. I am well acquainted with the responsibilities for my work at this point, and I'm comfortable, but of course there's no stopping a stalker. He had traded his shift and was working the night shift with me. He was angry every time he looked at me, and I avoided him at all costs. Then, around halfway through my shift, I'm down in the basement coming back from the restroom. I'm walking up the steps that lead back to my work area, and I then feel someone behind me. Before I could think a clear thought, I was pushed against the wall, hand beside my head, He leans in and says, "You should smile more." Then he chuckles and walks away. I feel pretty hysterical at this point and run to the closest lead, crying and trying to explain what happened. It was at this point that my manager, Christopher, was angry that HR was taking so long to investigate my case, and that he went to them and sped things up. Well, after 4 months of an interview process with HR, finally the case was resolved, and not only was he let go, but I was doing really well in my job, finally. Nothing to worry me into not paying attention to my duties. Creepy coworker has left me alone ever since, but sometimes I get random requests from guys with no pictures and always similar names, always close to his name. Creepy coworker has left me alone ever since, but sometimes I get random friend requests from guys with no pictures and always similar names, always close to his name. My friend Sally has had a bad run with neighbors, but this was one of the worst. Sally lives very close to me, about a 10-minute walk, and we're both around 14 years old when this happened. We live in the rural area, so we both had a lot of land. Me and Sally decided to go camping on her land. We bought cheap hammocks and went through the bushland. The days prior, we spent clearing some of the razor glass with a cane knife to make a path. We probably should have worn long pants because we ended up with little cuts all over our legs and some of our arms. We set up our hammocks and brought quite a few blankets because it does get pretty cold at night, even though you're sweating through the day. We were still on her property and hadn't gone to her neighbor's boundary. Her neighbor had just leased the land to new tenants. Me and Sally were sitting on our hammocks talking and laughing, and this was around 9 p.m. We heard something in the bush. We just thought it was a wallaby. There's plenty of wallabies around there. Then we could see the figure of a man. We were whispering to each other, trying to see who it was. At first we thought it was her brother, as he's scared us when we were camping previously. Then as the person got closer, we were thinking it could have been her dad. It was dark and the bush looks the same from every angle. We realized the man was coming from the other direction than her house. We didn't dare move and covered our torches under our blankets. The man came up and said hi and introduced himself as Ben. Now Ben was extremely drunk. He staggered around and reeked of alcohol. He started saying how we had a nice little camp here and said something pretty unsettling. "I'll have to come and sunbake naked here on one of these hammocks." Me and Sally gave each other worried looks but didn't say anything. It only got worse from there. I can't remember everything he said because it was a while ago and he was mumbling on for what felt like forever. But some of the things that stuck out were like, "I'll have to kill yus Wolf Creek style," and said, "You're nearly legal then," when he asked us our age. Ben was probably in his 40s. Me and Sally were texting each other while he was talking and coming up with an escape plan. He also offered us puff on the magic dragon and pulled out a glass pipe. We declined. Sally said that we were leaving back to the house to make food. He told us to come back, and we left our blankets and most of the stuff there and legged it. We told her dad what happened and we slept inside. The next morning we went back to our campsite to find everything burnt. A circle with probably a 20-meter radius was all burnt. Coming from that circle was a line of burnt grass, going towards the neighbor's house. I'm not a firefighter, nor do I do forensics, but it seemed obvious that some kind of fuel was used. Me and Sally were talking and it dawned on us that possibly that Ben may have thought we were in the hammocks due to the pile of blankets. Ben was definitely drunk enough not to be able to tell the difference. We went and told Sally's dad, who then checked it out and then went next door. Ben's roommate answered the door and said Ben wasn't home and apologized. He even gave Sally's dad $50 for the blankets and hammocks. And nothing more happened for a few months. Sally told me at school about how Ben had been caught on camera sneaking around her yard. I went to her house after school because she was going to be home alone after her dad finished work. I ended up sleeping over there that night, and that's when he came over. Ben was drunk and came out of the front of Sally's house and started yelling, He accused Sally of stealing his dog. Sally's dad called the police. They arrested him. The next day, we found a knife in the yard. It wasn't from Sally's house. The police came and we told them about the knife, and they got the footage from the cameras as well. I don't know what happened to Ben, but thankfully he no longer lives next to Sally. This happened to me during my junior year of college. For context, I'm a 22-year-old female. I was driving from my hometown in the Chicago suburbs to the University of Missouri, which is about a 6-hour drive. I made the drive about every 4 to 6 weeks to see my family and my long-distance boyfriend. There are 2 main ways to take to the town my university is in: stay on the interstate system through central Illinois and St. Louis, or branch out to back roads after Springfield, Illinois, until picking the interstate back up about 30 minutes from my college. I usually took the back roads simply because it kept me awake with the constant speed limit changes and occasional towns, but this particular time I took the interstate system because there was a high potential for winter weather. I was minding my own business, listening to one true crime podcast episode after another when, about an hour from my exit, traffic came to a standstill. Great, I thought. It was already way beyond dark at this point. It was also a Sunday night, and I just wanted to get home and catch a decent night's sleep before my Monday classes. After a while, emergency vehicles flew past this traffic on the shoulder, indicating that there must have been an accident up ahead. After what felt like forever, traffic slowly started crawling again and eventually started moving a little as we all passed the accident. And this is when it started. I will admit I like to drive fast on the interstate, especially on this particular drive. What college kid doesn't? I was in the right lane with a decent amount of space between me and the car in front of me. And that is when I noticed someone right on my bumper. Seriously? I muttered aloud. Traffic was no longer super heavy, and the person could easily pass me in the left lane. Suddenly, the car began flashing their brights at me and honking. I was extremely confused. I turned off my podcasts and kept a close eye on my rear view. The person continued to flash their brights, half blinding me in the darkness through the mirrors. God, I said, flooring it into the left lane. I maneuvered in and out of a few cars, attempting to get away from whatever issue this person had, except they followed my every move. Being a 21-year-old female, I began to get a sick feeling in my stomach. I had listened to enough true crime and general horror stories to be just the right amount of paranoid. I had read on social media recently about girls from my school encountering human traffickers in my town and along the interstate that runs through it. One of the town's papers had even ran a series of stories regarding multiple human trafficking rings that use this interstate to traffic victims because it basically runs the length of the entire country. I shook the disturbing thought out of my head and continued doing about 85 miles per hour in the right lane unless I had to go around someone. The car continued following me, flashing its lights and barely letting themselves ever get more than a few cars behind me or beside me. I finally took the exit to my university. I looked back and the car had followed. It seemed as though the person was trying to get me to pull over. Is there something wrong with my car that I can't see? I wondered silently. Even if there was no way I was pulling over on the side of an interstate in the middle of a dark, rainy night. This is exactly how urban legends or teenage slasher movies start. At this point, I had no idea what to do. Looking back, I really should have driven straight to the local police station, but I was too flustered and scared to think straight. I tried to think back on the last hour or so of my drive. Did I cut anyone off? I didn't think so. I didn't think I had done anything to make any drivers around me this angry. I'm a relatively good driver and tend to mind my own business on the road, not engaging in road rage or anything stupid like that. I stupidly began driving to my apartment. The car continued to follow, still flashing their lights every so often, but no longer honking. They continued to stay glued to my bumper, and I began to panic. What if they follow me all the way to my home? What should I do? Call the police and send them on a wild goose chase to look for me in this car as I'm driving around town? As I approached another small exit off a local highway onto a smaller street that ran past campus and towards the apartment, I had no idea. As I got closer to the exit, I did not get into the far right lane to turn off. At the very last second, I jerked the wheel and careened across the gravel shoulder so close to the grass that I barely missed driving off the road. As I gunned it down the exit ramp, I glanced up at the overpass. The car had screeched to a halt and was honking its horn maniacally. I cried the rest of the way home, calling my boyfriend and explaining what had just happened. I never got a good enough look at the car to get a license plate number or really even a good description of the vehicle, so I never reported the incident to the police. To this day, I have no idea what exactly it was that happened that night. My best guess is that whoever this person was, they saw me when we were all stopped on the interstate, waiting for the emergency vehicles to clear the scene. It's very clear from the stickers I have on my car, one of my university's name and one that said Dog Mom, that I was a likely college-age female. All this person had to do was end up next to me, see that I was a female driving alone on the interstate in the middle of the night, and have just the wrong intentions. I live in France, and this story happened to me this summer, just after the lockdown ended. I was, and am still, 19 at that time. After the lockdown ended, I went to my grandparents to spend a few weeks. I got tested before and no problems there. My grandparents live in a small city in the north of France, and they have a dog who's quite a big dog. When I was really young, I lived with my grandparents for a year, and at that time the dog was only a puppy. Her name is Chippy, in French, which kind of means little devil in English, but in an affectionate way. Considering when I was living there I played with her a lot, we are both really close, and that will be important for later. Two of my hobbies are having long walks and running. Thus, every evening I was going out for a long walk with the dog. There's a track that follows a path through the forest, then there's a small hill, and on top of that, a big place with lots of fields there. I run there a lot, so I know the place. The air is fresh and the view is quite beautiful. And I was going there with the dog every day. I was also helping my grandparents to have her dog do lots of exercise, so that was good. The first time we went there, nothing special happened. We just enjoyed our walk. It was about 7 to 6 kilometers, so basically an hour-long walk. The next day, when we arrived on the top of the hill in the field, it was probably around 10 p.m., but there was still some light because it's summer. There was 3 other persons walking in the fields. They were younger than me, probably about 15 to 16. I also noticed that they were smoking, so my guess was that they used to come here so they couldn't be seen by their parents. We went past them. I greeted them and they greeted back. Once again, nothing special. For a whole week I did this walk around the same time, around 10 p.m., and passed by those 3 guys with nothing special happening, and it was perfectly fine to me this way. The second week, as usual, I went for the walk with the dog Chippy and arrived at the fields. There was only one of the 3 boys. He wasn't smoking this time, though. When he saw me, I was at the entrance of the field just after the little hill climb, so the entrance of the forest was just behind me. He did a sign with his hand to catch my attention and asked if I had a lighter, which I actually had in my pocket. I told him yeah, sure, so he walked to me, the hand in the pocket of his hoodie. When he came near, for some reason I felt a shiver. It's crazy how sometimes your instincts know there's a problem, but you don't listen to it because nothing looks weird to you, superficially. I handed over the lighter when he passed by. At that moment, my dog was staring at him. Then everything happened really fast. He did a really fast movement with his hand, coming from the hoodie, and I only saw something shining. I just had a reflex of throwing myself back, so hard that I fell down, and I just realized it was a knife that he was holding, and he just tried to stab me. What saved me is my dog, God bless her. When she saw the guy trying to stab me, she jumped on him, and he fell down. As I said before, it's a really big dog. I immediately got up on my feet and heard something in my back. From the entrance of the forest, I saw 2 guys wearing animal masks running towards me, and they were probably his 2 friends. In this moment, your brain acts for yourself. You don't think at all, and in this case, the answer he found was really simple. The other guy was still on the ground. I just watched my dog and told her to run. I started running and she followed me, but I heard the worst possible thing from the guy who got up as well. "Catch him. Don't let him go." At this moment, I was totally terrified. I was just running and running. I heard them running behind me. I was only thinking, how long will they follow me? Who are these people? This was the first time I was really happy to be a runner. I was clearly better than those guys, and that completely saved me because they chased for something that felt like an eternity to me. Fortunately, at the end of the field, there's another entrance to the forest, and this time its descent was to the road at the end. I heard the steps of the three guys vanishing as I arrived at the end of the forest, though I didn't stop running until I arrived at my grandparents' house and locked myself in. I caught a big breath and gave my dog a huge hug. I saw in her eyes that she totally understood what happened, and I had never been so happy to have her in my life. After that, I told everything to my grandparents and we called the police, but they were unable to find anyone there. I don't know what those guys wanted, but the animal mask really made me think about some kind of Satanist. I really don't know anyway. I still go on long walks with my hero dog Chippy, but now I go earlier and to places with much more people.
Before I begin this insanely terrifying tale, do me a favor. Think of the one person that you have a genuine connection with. Not a romantic connection, a friendship connection. Think of the one person that you trust and that helps you with any and everything. It doesn't matter how you met or how long you've known each other. Got that person? Good. Hopefully this story doesn't ruin your confidence in that person or your friendship with them. In the end of 2018, I was a sophomore in college and I was majoring in physics. I was taking one of my final calculus courses, and on the first day of class, I sat down next to this guy who would become one of my closest, most trusted friends. For the sake of this story, let's say his name is Tony. I'm a female, and when we first met, I'm not going to lie, there was a bit of an attraction, but it was nothing more than the completely natural thought of, that person is good looking. Nothing ever happened, and it was as if we were only ever meant to be friends. We'd study together for exams, and when I needed help with a physics chapter, he'd go out of his way to meet up with me and help me out. We told each other everything about ourselves, not in an attempt to flirt or anything, but just talking as if we were long-lost friends. At the time of our meeting, I was managing a very well-known retail store, and during the Christmas season of 2018, I was looking for seasonal workers. I gave Tony a job, and we maintained a manager-employee relationship at work. And then we were regular friends outside of work. He was one of the best salespeople that I had on staff, and he caught on rather quickly and got along with everyone. He was hilarious. After the Christmas season was over in January of 2019, he left the store, and we went on with our normal friendship. Sadly, well, at the time it was sadly, we somehow just stopped talking towards the end of 2019. We didn't get into an argument or anything, and we still liked each other's posts on Facebook and Instagram. Then, this year, 2020, the news broke. My new best friend was a very close-to-be school shooter. He was arrested on federal charges for terroristic threats, for threatening to carry out the largest school shooting that the world had ever seen. He had planned, and he was ready. He said that he had plenty of ammo to get the right amount of people to make him a legend. The reason that he knew that he had just enough? He had a list. Who was on that list? Me. Don't trust anyone.
Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/LetsReadOfficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data. located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, vegetables are a social construct.